It would be so much simpler if he just went into the home. He's practically a ghost in that house anyway. The words drifted over the manicured lawn, weaving through the thick, humid air of a late August afternoon. They were carried on a cloud of citronella and grilling meat, and they found me standing just inside the gate of my son's backyard. The voice was my daughter-in-law's, Susan's, sharp and clear, unburdened by any thought that I might be within earshot. A short, brittle laugh followed, from someone I didn't recognize. My son, Mark, said nothing. His silence was a familiar sound. It was an old friend of mine, that silence. It had sat with me at countless dinner tables, ridden shotgun in the car on holidays, and stood beside me at my wife's funeral. It was a heavy, dense thing, a cruelty wrapped in the simple absence of words. My hands did not tremble. They held the glass baking dish, still warm from my oven. A peach cobbler, Helen's recipe. I had been up since 5 that morning, peeling the soft, fuzzy skins from the fruit, rolling out the biscuit topping, just so. I had made it because my granddaughter, Lily, had once mentioned, years ago, that she loved it. I held on to these small scraps of memory like a life raft. I could have turned around. I could have gotten back in my car, driven the 12 miles home, and placed the cobbler on my own counter. I could have eaten a spoonful, then let the rest of it go soft in the summer heat. It would have been the easiest thing to do. It would have been what the old me, the man who existed 10 minutes ago, would have done. He was a man well practiced in the art of disappearance. But I didn't. Instead, I took a breath. The air tasted of smoke and betrayal. I pushed the gate open wider. The hinges groaned a little, a small announcement of my arrival. I walked onto the patio. Susan saw me first. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering. It was wide and bright, but it did not touch her eyes. Her eyes were hard little stones. "David, you made it. We were just wondering where you were a lie." It sat in the air between us like old perfume. Mark turned, a burger flipper in his hand. He had my wife's eyes, but they held none of her warmth. "Hey, Dad. Glad you could come." He didn't move toward me, didn't offer to take the heavy dish. He just stood by the grill, a king in his small, smoky kingdom. I walked to the long folding table covered in a red-checkered plastic cloth. I found a space between a bowl of potato salad and a stack of paper plates. I set down the cobbler. The dish made a solid, satisfying sound as it connected with the table. It was real. I was real. I was here. I watched them for the rest of the afternoon. Not with hurt, not anymore. That feeling had been burned out of me by Susan's words. I watched with a new kind of clarity, a cold and terrible focus. I was an anthropologist studying a strange and distant tribe. I saw how no one looked at me when they spoke. Their questions were thrown into the general space I occupied. "How's the car running? Weather's supposed to turn tomorrow." They say. They never waited for a full answer. My grandsons, 17 and 19, sat with their heads bent over their phones, thumbs flying. They hadn't looked up when I arrived. They did not acknowledge me now. I was a part of the scenery, like the wilting marigolds in the terracotta pots, leaning over like tired shoulders. At one point, Mark raised his beer bottle in a toast. "To family," he said, his voice thick with a sentiment he didn't feel. A few people cheered. His eyes swept across the yard and passed right over me, as if I were a ghost already. I stayed for 2 hours. I ate a hot dog on a flimsy paper plate. I drank a can of lukewarm soda. I answered the half questions with half answers. I performed the part of the quiet, unassuming father, the harmless old man who was grateful for the invitation. It was a role I had played for years, and the costume was comfortable, familiar. But today I could feel the seams tearing. When it was time to leave, I stood up. Susan was deep in conversation with another couple. She saw me rise and gave me a little wave, her smile already fixed on the next person. A dismissal. "I'm heading out, Mark," I said, walking over to the grill. He nodded, scraping at the grate with a wire brush. "Okay, Dad. Drive safe. We'll call you another lie." A polite and comfortable one. I walked back to my car. The cobbler was still on the table, a single serving scooped out of one corner. I left it there. I didn't need it anymore. The drive home was quiet. The silence in the car wasn't Mark's silence. It was mine. It was a planning silence. A silence of decision. The next morning, I made coffee. For 35 years, I had used the large 12-cup percolator. Helen and I, then the three of us, then just me, but I always made enough just in case Mark or the kids stopped by. They rarely did. This morning, I reached into the back of the baking cabinet behind the mismatched Tupperware and the bundt pan I never used. I pulled out a small 4-cup machine I'd bought for a camping trip a decade ago. I washed the dust from it, filled it with water and grounds, and made just enough for one mug. It felt like a revolution. Sipping the coffee, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about money. Not in a greedy way, in a factual way. I remember the year Mark's contracting business almost went under. He and Susan had come to this very table, their faces pale with worry. They were going to lose their house, the house I was just in yesterday. Helen was still alive then, but her illness had already taken her voice. She had looked at me, her eyes clear and certain, and squeezed my hand. I wrote them a check that afternoon, a check that cleared out nearly half of our retirement savings, a check that paid off their mortgage in full. There was no loan agreement, no paperwork. It was a gift. To family, I had said. Mark had cried. He had hugged me and called me his hero. That memory felt like it belonged to another man's life. I spent the rest of the day in my small office. It wasn't a search for secrets. It was a search for facts. I pulled out the heavy file box from the bottom of the closet. I didn't look at old photo albums or letters. I looked at documents. The deed to my house, paid off for 20 years in my name and Helen's. My pension statements. My investment portfolio. And then I found the one I was looking for. The durable power of attorney, signed 5 years ago, making Mark my legal agent should I become incapacitated. I had signed it in good faith at his insistence. Just to be safe, Dad, he'd said. I stared at his signature next to mine. It looked like a forgery, not of his name, but of his intent. The next day, I made a phone call. Not to a friend, not to a pastor, to a man named Mr. Miller, an estate lawyer. My friend Art had used him and said he was all business, no fluff. That's what I wanted. I didn't need sympathy. I needed a craftsman, a tool. I'd like to make an appointment to review my legal documents, I said to the voice on the other end of the line. My own voice sounded steady, firm. I was surprised by it. The appointment was for the following week. In the days leading up to it, I began to clear things out. Not the house, not yet. I started with the hope. In the garage, on a high shelf, was a large box labeled Trains. Inside was the model train set my own father had given me. I had kept it pristine, saved it for my grandsons. For years, I had imagined a day when one of them would sit with me, their eyes wide with wonder, as we set up the tracks around the Christmas tree. But that day never came. Their wonders were small and lived behind glass screens. I sealed the box with packing tape. On trash day, I carried it to the curb. It was heavier than I remembered. I set it down and walked back to the house without looking back. It was just a box of metal and plastic. It meant nothing. My phone buzzed that afternoon. A text from Mark. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Susan said you seemed a little off at the barbecue. Everything okay? The blame shift was so casual, so practiced. Susan said. I read the message twice. I saw the trap. If I said yes, I was lying. If I said no, I was opening a door to a conversation I no longer wished to have. A conversation where my feelings would be managed, placated, and ultimately dismissed. I held my finger over the screen until the option appeared. Delete. The message vanished. I felt lighter. Later, my next-door neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Gable, knocked on my door. She held out a section of a newspaper. David, I thought you want to see this, she said. The Historical Society is looking for old photographs of downtown. I remembered you saying you had some of your father's old store. It was a simple kindness, a moment of being seen, of being remembered. We stood on the porch and talked for 10 minutes about the weather and her overgrown rose bushes. The interaction was easy, reciprocal. It was everything the barbecue was not. It was real. That evening, I stood in the living room, looking at the photographs on the mantelpiece. There was one of me and Mark taken on a fishing trip when he was about 10. He was holding up a small, glistening trout, his smile so wide it threatened to split his face. He was proud. He was looking at me, his hero. I picked up the heavy silver frame. I looked at the boy in the picture, and I grieved for him. I grieved for the man he never became. Then I turned the photograph face down. The time for sentiment was over. The meeting with Mr. Miller was in a clean, quiet office that smelled of paper and lemon polish. He was a man with a neat, gray mustache and glasses that sat low on his nose. He didn't ask me why I was there. He just asked what I wanted to do. "I want to revoke this," I said, sliding the copy of the power of attorney across the polished wood desk. He looked at it, then back at me over his glasses. "All right," he said. He explained the process. It was simple. A form, a signature, a notary. A piece of paper to undo another piece of paper. "And my will," I said. "I want to change it." He pulled out a fresh legal pad. "To what?" "My wife and I, we got our last dog from the county animal shelter. A little beagle mix named Barnaby. Best dog we ever had. I want everything to go to them. The house, the savings, all of it." Mr. Miller wrote it down without comment. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask about my son. He was a craftsman. I gave him a job, and he was doing it. "And one more thing," I said. "I need a good locksmith." The locksmith came the next day. A young man with tattooed arms and a quiet efficiency. The sound of the drill biting into the old wood of my front door was jarring, but necessary. He handed me 2 new keys. They felt strange in my hand, sharp and unfamiliar. I put one on my key ring and the other in the back of my sock drawer. The lock clicked shut with a sound of absolute finality. My next stop was the bank. The same bank where I'd sat with Mark and Susan all those years ago. I asked to see the branch manager, a woman I'd known for years. I explained, calmly and without emotion, that I needed to remove my son's name as a joint owner on my checking and savings accounts. I wanted to cancel the supplementary credit card he carried. I wanted to change all my online passwords and security questions. She was professional, but I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Of course, David," she said. One by one, we went through the forms. With each signature, I felt a cord being cut. I was methodically, carefully erasing him. Not from my past, but from my present and my future. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. That night, I went through the file box again. I took out every document related to Mark, his birth certificate, his school report cards, the file from his appendectomy when he was 12. I didn't destroy them. I placed them all in a new, smaller box. With a black marker, I wrote one word on the lid. Archive. He was no longer a current event. He was history. It was 2 days later that Mark came. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I saw his car pull into the driveway. I dried my hands and watched from the window as he walked up the path, whistling. He put his key in the lock. I heard the scrape of metal on metal, the futile jiggle, the confused pause. He knocked. A light, casual rap. He expected the door to swing open. I stood in the hallway, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I did not move. I did not make a sound. He knocked again, harder this time. "Dad? You in there?" I looked through the peephole. His face was pinched with irritation. He tried the handle again. He took out his phone. A moment later, I felt the vibration in my own pocket. I let it ring. He peered through the front window, cupping his hand around his eyes. I had already drawn the curtains. He stood on my porch for 10 minutes, a monument to baffled entitlement. Finally, he turned and stomped back to his car, driving away with a squeal of tires. The silence he left behind was clean. It was pure. It was mine. The phone call I was waiting for came the next evening. It wasn't from Mark. It was from Lily, my granddaughter. "Grandpa," her voice was small, hesitant. "I'm here, Lily." There was a long pause, and then a rush of words. "I'm so sorry. I heard what my mom said at the barbecue. It was horrible. I wanted to say something, but I froze. It was wrong. What she said, and me not saying anything. It was all wrong. I listened. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't say, 'It's okay.' It wasn't okay." "What part was wrong, Lily?" I asked, my voice gentle but firm. She hesitated. "All of it. Saying you were a ghost." "It's not true." "You're not. Thank you for calling me," I said. "That took courage. Can I see you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "We can meet. But only if we agree to talk about what's true." "Okay, Grandpa," she whispered. "Only truth." The next day, it was Susan at the door. I saw her car, a big, aggressive SUV, block my driveway. The knock was not a knock. It was a summons. I opened the door a few inches, leaving the chain on. Her face was a mask of indignation. David, what is this? What is going on? Mark can't get in. You're not answering your phone. Are you trying to punish us? Is this some kind of game? I looked at her, the woman who thought I was a ghost. No, Susan, I said, my voice as calm and flat as a winter lake. This is not a game. This is a consequence. This is the result of 30 years of being treated as a utility. A driver, a babysitter, a bank. This is the result of being discussed as a problem to be solved while I am standing 10 feet away. There is no game. Her mouth opened and closed. She had come prepared for a fight, for tears, for guilt. She was not prepared for facts. You can't do this, she finally sputtered. It's already done, I said, and I gently closed the door, sliding the bolt into place. Mark returned that night. He didn't knock. He yelled, Dad, open the door. We need to talk about this. This is insane. You can't just cut us off over one bad afternoon. I went to the door and spoke through the solid wood. My voice didn't have to be loud to be heard. No, Mark, I said, this isn't about one bad afternoon. This is about all the afternoons. All the birthdays you forgot. All the holidays you showed up late to. All the times you asked for money and never once asked how I was doing. All the silences when your wife was cruel. It's about the entire album, not just the last song. I heard him breathing on the other side of the door. There was nothing left for him to say. I walked away and turned on the television. A week later, a for sale sign was hammered into my front lawn. The house was too big. It was full of the ghosts of a family I had thought I possessed. I walked through each room one last time. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a quiet sense of acknowledgement. This chapter was over. I took my wife's photograph, my woodworking tools, my books, and the small drawing Lily had made for me when she was 6. The rest was just stuff. I found a small second-floor apartment in a quiet building across town. It had a big window in the living room that looked out over an old oak tree. It was clean and honest and just enough. I signed a lease the same day. Moving day was quiet. I hired a small crew. They were done in 3 hours. As I stood in the empty apartment, surrounded by a few boxes, I didn't feel lost. I felt spacious. The first thing I did was unpack the coffee pot, the small one. Then I hung Lily's drawing on the wall with a piece of tape. I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the oak tree. I was home. The house sold quickly. When the check came, I didn't even deposit it into my account. I endorsed it directly over to the animal shelter, as Mr. Miller had instructed. I mailed it that afternoon. The final financial tie was severed. I had acted on my new will's intentions while I was still alive to see it through. It was a good feeling. My new life began to take shape. I met Art and Bill for coffee every Tuesday. We talked about our gardens and our bad knees. We talked about books we were reading and the absurdities of local politics. No one ever interrupted me. No one tried to explain my own thoughts back to me. Our conversations were a comfortable, well-worn sweater. Lily became a regular visitor. She would come by after her classes at the community college. She'd sit in the armchair by the window, and we would talk. She told me about her dreams of being a veterinarian. I told her stories about her grandmother she had never heard. We were building something new, the two of us. A relationship based not on obligation, but on genuine affection, on truth. A letter arrived one day, with Mark's handwriting on the envelope. An apology. I read it. It was full of phrases like I never realized, and I was under a lot of stress. It was an explanation more than an apology, an attempt to reframe his neglect as an oversight. I folded it carefully and placed it in the archive box. I didn't need to accept it. I didn't need to reject it. It had no power over me anymore. It was just a piece of paper. On my 79th birthday, I bought myself a slice of cake from the bakery down the street and a new mystery novel. I spent the day in my armchair, reading and watching the squirrels in the oak tree. It was peaceful. It was enough. That evening, Lily came by. She had a small, lopsided cake she had baked herself. She also had a card. On the front was a drawing she had made, a careful, detailed sketch of a single, sturdy oak tree, its branches reaching for the sky. Inside, she had written only 4 words. I see you, Grandpa. Tears pricked my eyes for the first time in a very long time. They were not tears of sadness or of anger. They were tears of recognition. Later that night, before I went to bed, I took out the small journal I had recently bought. I wrote a single entry. It was time to mark the beginning. For 78 years, I was a husband, a father, a provider, a handyman, a bank. My name was a title, a function. Today, I began the work of being David. To remember my own name. To set my own table. I am